And we are back on Open Line. We are here with Clint Kelly, attorney for the Kelly firm in Hendersonville. We were talking about medical malpractice, and so often things can go wrong when you are with your doctor, whether it's at the hospital, whether it's at the doctor's office. Something happens, and you wonder, do I have a case? And I think one of the things, Clint, that we often say is people, when it comes to this, in the past, it almost felt like people said, well, I don't want to be sue happy. I don't want to, take this to court. For some of the things that would go wrong, and they would have these outlandish settlements and things like that. But the laws here, I think a lot of people in Tennessee question the laws being totally not in favor of someone who's been victimized by something like this.
Yeah, there was a dramatic shift in the laws in 2008 for the very reasons you said. There was a perception in the medical community, and then it spilled over into the legislature and in some degree in the press, that patients were winning these cases, doctors were losing these cases, and we got to give the doctors and hospitals a big break. And so starting in 2008 and going forward really to today, our legislature has chipped away at patients' rights to bring these cases, or they've put legal impediments in front of the cases to make it very difficult to get your day in court. And what it has done, it is tilted the pendulum has gone completely over to the side, to the physician and to the hospital, leaving the patient, in the dust. And so you have to have almost a perfect case, and I say you, I'm talking about, malpractice plaintiff attorneys, have to have almost a perfect case to navigate our way through all of the potholes and curves and eddies that the legislature has forced upon us to get justice for patients. And people like Sherry and some of the other people who've called in, they get left behind because our laws simply do not allow for us to bring those cases. And I hope at some point, I hope I see it in my lifetime, that this pendulum will swing back. I think part of it is, I think a lot of it's politics, but I think also part of it is perception, and perhaps as time goes on, people will realize doctors and hospitals win 80% of these lawsuits. 80%. A patient has better odds at Vegas against the house in a blackjack game than would have trying a case in front of a jury in Tennessee to try to get a malpractice verdict. That's how hard it is to win, and that's why we have to be so careful to pick the perfect case. And that's why there was never any need for these laws, because the win rate really wasn't much different in 2008 than it is now for doctors and hospitals.
If someone is out there watching right now and they have encountered a variety of problems, and they're saying, well, I'm not getting better, and there was this problem, and do I have just cause? What do you advise them to do at this point?
Pick up the phone and call. Call me. It's free. It doesn't cost anything to do what Sherry and Amanda and others have done, which is simply pick up the phone, call, give some background, some history. I've got people at my office that know exactly what to ask in order for me to make an evaluation of whether or not the claim has merit, whether or not I can investigate it. I have experts that I send these cases to, medical experts, who review the claims and tell me whether or not there has been negligence and whether that caused an injury. And I want to point one other thing out to you, Chuck. You and I talked off air about this. The perception that people are sue happy is completely contradicted by what you're hearing here tonight, which are all these people who didn't sue within the year, who didn't even call a lawyer within the year, because they just don't think to sue. They're like, well, I'm going to get better. Whereas, if we had a real sue-happy public here, people would be calling the next day. Give me a lawyer. I'm ready to go to court. I'm ready to take that health care provider on. You don't see that. We don't see that. That's why this perception is a bunch of baloney, and has been for years. But until the public changes its mind, and until we are able to get the truth out to people, like I said, people who've been calling here are not going to be able to get justice very often.
And if you are tuning in, and if you're just tuning in by chance, again, we're talking about medical malpractice, and I did want to put the number up so that if you do need to contact Clint and the Kelly firm, it's easy for you to do. It's 615-824-3703. If you want to write this other number down, 888-824-3400, located in Hendersonville. And I believe you're like one of the only firms that even takes on medical malpractice cases. It's a very specialized form of law. You guys have to know so much and navigate your way around, so it is good to know that that is your specialty when someone has this problem.
That's correct. In Tennessee, Tennessee allows specialization in medical malpractice. I'm specialized, I'm certified in it, and there's just a small fraternity of us who handle these cases. And probably in the Nashville area and those that take the greater Nashville area, there may be 10 of us that do this on a regular basis because there is a substantial amount of training and experience. We have to have a certain amount of jury trials that we've completed a verdict in order to be specialized. And also we have to keep up with the legal developments that come from the courts as well as from the legislature, like you and I have talked about. And probably most importantly, we have to have access to physicians and other experts willing to review these cases, and the great number of lawyers who do other type of business, whether it's personal injury or workers' comp, they don't have access to those experts or the type of specialization we have. So yeah, we're a very small fraternity.
And you know, when we talk about, and as people are watching this evening as well, physician's negligence, what falls under that umbrella that you would take on a case?
Well, you've mentioned earlier all the different varieties of cases, surgical mistakes, failure to diagnose, like we talked about heart attack cases. Nick and I were talking, Nick did a report on Channel 5 about these male medical clinics that are giving these shots to men to try to create an erection, and these men have permanent damage to their sexual organs because the doctor should never have prescribed that. And that's a cash business, a whole nother story all its own. I mean, you can find it on Channel 5 Plus, but misdiagnosis cases, surgical misadventures, situations where physicians have prescribed the wrong medication, or the nurses have given the wrong medication, or have failed to recognize signs and symptoms of an impending disease that causes the patient's death, which could have been prevented. Those are the types of cases I take.
Well, and if you're watching and something like that has occurred to you, or a family member or a friend, please feel free to give us a call at 737-7587. We are going to go back to the lines right now. James is on the line with us. James, thanks for joining us this evening. And do you have a question or a comment for Clint?
Yes, I do, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Beginning of December, I feel too good. Went to the hospital. 3 days later, I'm having a triple bypass. But 2 days after that, they do the artery in the neck. And I come out of that not being able to talk, not being able to eat solid food, and they put a tube in my stomach. Now, how long do I go and hope that I heal? When they admitted surgery that the artery in the neck admits that he hit a nerve in my neck.
James, is that a PEG tube, a PEG tube that you got in your stomach?
Pardon me?
Is it called a PEG tube? Is that what you've got? All right. When you have carotid surgery, one of the risks of the procedure is that you can do some damage to the pharynx, or the muscles in the larynx. Now, this sounds really bad, and you would expect there to be some recovery. So I don't know how long it's going to take for him to recover. I would say, James, if you haven't gotten better, if you have not recovered the ability to eat, or your speaking ability has not recovered substantially within the next 30 days, you call my office, give my office a history of what's happening. I'll look into it, because this doesn't sound right to me.
Okay, so thank you very much for calling in, James, and please take that advice. And I hope you saw the screen. We do have that number for you if you are tuning in and you would like to contact right there on your screen. 615-824-3703 is the number at the Kelly Firm, and you can give them a call and go from there. You know, again, when we talk about some of the laws that seem to be fair and unfair and that kind of thing, tort reform, that really changed things a lot in the past few years. So tell us a little bit about that and why that's such a challenge now.
Yeah, it is a game changer in many respects. The legislature put caps on the amount that patients, and not just patients, for everyone who files a personal injury action, can recover for what they call non-economic damages. But the non-economic damages are the pain and suffering, the loss of the value of a spouse or a child. They put a preset cap of $750,000 for the vast majority of cases, and if you're in a wheelchair, $1 million cap. Now, you think about the fact that in Tennessee, we trust juries, regular people from the community, to decide whether or not someone lives or dies from a capital murder case. But we can't trust jurors to assign a reasonable value of damages, and instead the government tells us what we can and can't do. And think about how unfair that is. And the product of that has been a lot of cases that I used to be able to take, like everything else, I can't take anymore because I don't have lost wages, lost earning capacity for elderly folks. If the case involves someone who is a child who may not have, we can't project a good lost earning capacity for them, I can't bring the case because the cap is so low I can't afford to bring it. And that was exactly the intention of the legislature, or the people who are pushing these laws, when they passed these caps. They wanted to run off a whole bunch of cases, and they did. And they really hit the elderly the hardest because they knew they wanted to go after the nursing home cases, which are probably the worst because they're the most vulnerable of all. And for those people who've had bad experiences in nursing homes, who've had ulcers and sores on their bodies because the nurses don't change their clothes, and urine and feces eats into their body, and they get boils and sores and they die. We can't take those cases because the damages are so limited. And that's what the legislature wanted, and that's what they got.
Mm. Now, we often hear, too, that today that jurors seem to favor hospitals and doctors. Why is that now?
Well, aren't we raised that way, Chuck? I mean, certainly here in the South, that's we grow up, basically it's in our DNA to trust our doctors, trust our healthcare staff, because we're putting our lives in people's hands. If we don't trust them, who are we going to trust? And so when these cases go to court, it's my experience that the juries, when they look at these cases, there's a number of things going on, but the first thing is there is a palpable suspicion of the patient, because there's been so much media saying that the system is broken and people are out for cash, jackpot justice, that sort of thing. So you got that going against you. And then the jurors look at the doctor or the hospital, particularly the doctors, and they think back to their doctor. And they think, well, I trust my doctor, and that bleeds off on the defendant. They automatically begin thinking the doctor probably is telling the truth here. The doctor probably knew what he or she was doing. So you have to fight against that and have them agree to look at the doctor, fairly with regards to the patient. And I think the other part of it is, I think the science itself, the medicine, jurors feel like they can't understand it. If I can't make the jury understand the medicine, I'm going to lose. If all things being equal at the end of the trial, if the jury really doesn't understand things, they're going to default and fine for the doctor of the hospital, because their mindset is, look, if I can't understand what happened, who am I to judge this doctor or hospital? So what I'm trained to do, what I specialize in, is taking very complex medical subjects and distilling them into organized, and for lack of a better term, simple concepts that jurors can understand, because I believe jurors can understand all kinds of medical things so long as I and my experts are good teachers.
And for people watching, they may be wondering, what are some of the cases that you have been able, that even if they were challenging, you have been able to get a nice settlement, a fair settlement, for the people that came to you, so that they have an idea?
Yeah, the most simple case you can think of is like what we talked about, heart attack. That's simple. People understand chest pain. I mean, that is not hard for people to relate to. But for someone who has had a neurological injury, where there's been a spinal surgery that's gone bad, where the patient begins to become paralyzed because they have a tumor or abscess on their spine, a lot of the litigation involves the interpretation of MRIs, monitoring of blood pressure during the surgery. You try to simplify those concepts, because what we're trying to do is point out there are rules, and there are professional rules, and establish Rule A, Rule B, Rule C were broken. And because those rules were broken, this patient is now paralyzed. So that's a case that, I had a brain injury case where a lady should have had a hole burrowed into her skull, and fluid should have been allowed to escape to release the pressure on the brain. She ultimately died because the doctor misdiagnosed her condition. But again, I was able to explain that to the jury in a way that they could understand fairly simple rules, and we were able to get a very good verdict in that case.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we are talking about medical malpractice. If you have a medical situation that's occurred to you, or a friend or a family member, and you have questions about it, you'd like to get some knowledge on it, you would like to get some advice on it, we're talking with Clint Kelly. He really helps us to understand a lot of these situations and cases, but we are going to take a short break, and then we'll return with more Open Line right after that.